Welcome to News Wrap Local. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Before we get started, let's check out these Pasadena Media News Briefs.
Pasadena's overall crime rate dropped by 7% during the first 6 months of 2021. According to statistics released by the Pasadena Police Department, robbery declined 14%, and assaults with a deadly weapon declined by 8% compared with 2020. The decrease follows a spike in violent crime last year. Pasadena Police Lieutenant William Grisafe said, after experiencing 58% increase in people shot and 85% increase in gun violence in 2020, we have made several key arrests, and we are continuing our intelligence-led policing strategies to catch those intent on committing violent acts. Not all categories are down, however. 3 homicides have been reported this year through June, compared with just 2 for all of last year. Domestic assaults rose by 10%, commercial burglaries by 16%, and vehicle thefts are up a surprising 17%. Assemblyman Chris Holden's legislation, AB 100, has passed the California State Environmental Quality Committee. AB 100 is a new piece of legislation that would set a limit on the amount of lead leaching from consumer drinking water faucets and fixtures, which often happens when they are used. Lead is a neurotoxin that damages the brain and central nervous system, and young children are especially susceptible. Lead is also a carcinogen that harms organs. Low levels of lead in children can cause IQ loss, learning disabilities, behavioral problems, and impaired hearing. AB 100 would restrict the amount of lead leaching from faucets and fixtures to no more than 1 microgram, 5 times lower than the current industry standard. While discussing the bill, Holden said, "We all expect the water we drink will keep us and our children healthy and not make us sick. This legislation ensures that faucets and plumbing fixtures sold in California leach as little lead as possible." A judge has ruled in favor of the city of Pasadena, ending the argument over who owns the Rose Bowl game. In February, the Tournament of Roses Association filed suit against Pasadena for alleged trademark infringement, unfair competition, false association, slander, and false advertising. Upon dismissing the suit, U.S. District Judge Andre Birote said, "The court agrees with the defendants, the city of Pasadena, that plaintiff cannot reasonably dispute that separate and apart from intellectual property ownership, the heart and soul of the Rose Bowl game belongs to the people of Pasadena." Judge Birote threw out the tournament's lawsuit claim with prejudice, which means the lawsuit is permanently dismissed. Tensions between the city and the tournament started when restrictions due to the pandemic caused the cancellation of the Rose Parade and prevented fans from attending the big game in Pasadena, forcing a temporary move to Arlington, Texas. Despite the deteriorating relationship, both sides maintain they are looking forward to 2022 when the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl game are scheduled to return to Pasadena.
Thank you for tuning in. After providing a few brief updates on various local stories, we'll speak with former Pasadena Mayor Rick Cole, who was recently tapped as a special housing advisor to current Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo. Since May, Cole has been the executive director of the Congress for the New Urbanism, a nonprofit organization that champions walkable and environmentally friendly cities. Following the release of the recent devastating UN report on climate change, it is clear that bold action is needed, including by cities such as Pasadena. We'll ask Rick Cole what tangible steps can and should be taken, as well as his thoughts on the affordable housing crisis. But first, I'm proud to announce that I was recently nominated for 2 Los Angeles Press Club awards for my reporting in Alta Journal about Mad Mike Hughes, the flat earther, daredevil, rocketeer, who died last year when he launched himself in a self-made steam-powered rocket thousands of feet into the air in the desert outside Barstow. This is the second time I've been nominated, the first being my reporting in 2015 on Joan Williams, Miss Crown City 1958, who was discriminated against by city officials and denied her place on the city's float in the Rose Parade because of her race. I'll tell you more about that story during the history segment at the end of the show. Let's turn now to our lightning round of news updates. 1. The City Council has loosened its cannabis regulations to allow up to 3 cannabis retailers per council district instead of 1 per district, and decreased the minimum distance between cannabis retailers from 1,000 feet to 450 feet. before these changes, Pasadena had some of the strictest licensing regulations and distancing requirements in California. However, there is still no local social equity program as many would like. The idea behind social equity is to make legal cannabis business ownership, employment opportunities, and economic advantages more accessible to low-income individuals and communities that have been most impacted by the criminalization of cannabis and the war on drugs. The soonest the council will revisit the topic of a social equity program will be next April. The City Council's Economic Development and Technology Committee unanimously voted last month to direct city staff to return to the committee in 18 months with the social equity strategy. 2, Caltech's Einstein Papers Project has released the 16th volume of Albert Einstein's scientific and non-scientific writings and correspondence, including 1,600 letters by and to Einstein, covering the period from June 1927 to May 1929. The new collection also includes scientific papers, poems, speeches, obituaries, and book reviews. In some of these writings, Einstein advocated for domestic legislative reform, gay and minority rights, European rapprochement, and conscientious objection to military service. 3, after being missing for 17 years, the headstone for Civil War era abolitionist Owen Brown has been restored to his gravesite in the mountains above Altadena. The property owner has also agreed to turn the property over to a land conservancy, according to Altadena historian Michelle Zach, who I served on the Altadena Town Council with many years ago. The LA County Owen Brown Gravesite Committee, formed by the LA County Board of Supervisors, will continue working to preserve the site, obtain historical landmark designation for the site, move the property into a land conservancy, and provide education to the community about the Brown family and the grave's historical significance. 4, the LA County Department of Public Works has completed the sediment removal project at Devil's Gate Dam 1 year ahead of schedule. The 4-year project involved removing 1.7 million cubic yards of sediment from the Devil's Gate Dam reservoir. However, workers will continue construction activities through November, and the habitat enhancement component of the project will continue through the fall of next year. The point of the project was to enable flood control to protect downstream communities while also restoring native habitat in the surrounding 70 acres of the Jajamungna watershed in the Arroyo Seco. But it was a controversial project as neighbors and environmentalists pointed to air and noise pollution and the many trucks that went back and forth from the site in order to remove the sediment. Meanwhile, the Pasadena City Council recently certified an environmental impact report for another controversial project to repair and replace facilities within the Arroyo Seco Canyon area that were damaged or destroyed by the station fire of 2009. Local preservationists say the project threatens trout living in a stream in the Arroyo. A recent negotiation effort failed to find a compromise between the two sides. 5, residents and affordable housing advocates rallied at City Hall recently to promote 25 demands they wanted city officials to add to the city's housing element. But those demands were not considered by the council. Those demands included providing housing security to Pasadena's rent-burdened tenants, making affordable housing easier and less expensive to build in Pasadena, enacting just cause eviction and anti-harassment tenant protections, establishing rent control to stop pricing tenants out of their homes, providing for a tenant's right to legal counsel, among others. The Pasadena Tenant Justice Coalition is currently gathering signatures for a ballot measure for the June 2022 election, which would amend the city charter and establish rent control tied to the Consumer Price Index, just cause eviction protections, and a rental housing board. A launch party for the campaign will take place this Saturday at 5 p.m. at Affordable Housing Services, located at 1516 Navarro Avenue, which will include food, music, prizes, and information about the rent control and just cause charter amendment. 6, more than 83.4% of Pasadenans are fully vaccinated and 92.3% have received at least one dose. City Manager Steve Ramel said the city has no plans to require proof of COVID-19 vaccination for indoor activities for the public, but city employees will be required to get vaccinated, and a mandatory indoor mask mandate is back due to the Delta variant and rising case numbers and hospitalizations, mostly among the unvaccinated. The Pasadena Unified School District Board of Education however, decided earlier this month not to require its employees and faculty to be vaccinated. With the school year now underway and many students who are not eligible to get the vaccine are back in the classroom. Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo even suggested that if PUSD does not mandate vaccinations, the city may withhold tax revenues from Measure J that it shares with the district to set up Pasadena's own learning centers. Pasadena Public Health Department Director Dr. Ying Go, who was the featured guest on the very first episode of this show in April, recommended that PUSD at the very least test its students for COVID every week. 7, a majority of the city's planning commission want the city council to issue a moratorium on planned developments because of ongoing inconsistencies between the city's general plan and specific plans and zoning code text. Commission members will meet with a planning department staff to discuss proposals and formalize the commission's recommendation to the council on the planned development moratorium. Relatedly, council recently granted an extension for a conditional use permit for the rehabilitation of the nearly 100-year-old YWCA building designed by California's first licensed female architect, Julia Morgan, which is across the street from City Hall. After decades of neglect, deterioration, eminent domain by the city, and a previously failed hotel bid, developers plan to turn it into a 2 to 6 story, 91,000 square foot hotel. The city recently completed a $500,000 restoration of the historic building. 8, as I've previously reported, the city is currently undergoing a redistricting process in which they're looking at the borders of the 7 city council districts. As part of that process, members of the public can go on the city's website and use an interactive digital mapping tool and draw your own maps of communities of interests. Visit cityofpasadena.net/redistricting and click on the District R mapping tool and submit a map of your community that you want the city to consider when potentially redrawing the borders of the city council's districts. Let's patch in our guest, former mayor of Pasadena, Rick Cole. Mr. Cole, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Justin, I'm delighted to join you.
Rick Cole served on the Pasadena City Council for 12 years and as mayor from 1992 to 1994. He has also served as city manager of Azusa, Ventura, and Santa Monica. He was recently tapped as a special housing advisor to current Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo. Since May, Cole has been the executive director of the Congress for the New Urbanism, a nonprofit organization that champions walkable and environmentally friendly cities. So Rick, why don't you start by telling us what is the Congress for the New Urbanism and tell us about your work there?
Sure, it's a national organization made up of architects, planners, builders, advocates for social justice, environmental sustainability. We have about 2,500 members around the country, 19 chapters. It began 3 decades ago with the Charter for the New Urbanism, which was really a clarion call, a protest against the trends of suburban sprawl and disinvestment in inner cities, building cities around cars instead of around human beings, turning our back on timeless ways of building that make places that people love, and instead create places that people are really suspicious of anything being built new, because it's really antithetical to building great livable places. So over the last 30 years, we've had a huge impact on changing the conversation. A lot of people now embrace a lot of the things that we were a voice in the wilderness in. I was involved in the movement as mayor of Pasadena. In fact, we brought the annual Congress of the Congress for New Urbanism to Pasadena. And it's a vibrant movement, and I think we have even more to say about the contemporary issues of climate change, the reckoning with racial justice in our cities, and the crisis in affordable housing. All of those things are things we have better answers to than the status quo.
And as you know, a recent UN report said that scientists now say the Earth will cross a crucial temperature threshold as early as 2030, up to a decade sooner than they thought. So what is the role of cities like Pasadena in combating climate change? Like, what can they do to help now?
Well, there's a huge amount they can do, Justin, and frankly, there's a huge opportunity here for people, for organizations, and for cities to not solve it within the 25 square miles of Pasadena, but to be a model for other communities. And Pasadena has a very good report that it put out in 2018, a climate action plan, pretty comprehensive. The challenge, though, Justin, is getting it implemented. I've been in public service now for more than 3 decades, and I kind of know how things work and what it takes to implement things. I often say that, where Edison said that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, government is 1% inspiration and 99% implementation. And as Peter Drucker said about organizations, what gets measured gets done. And until we're setting objective, measurable, time-bound targets and holding ourselves accountable for them, we're not going to see major progress. So, again, great 2018 report on the city's website, supposed to be annual updates. The last update on the city's website is 2018. If we're in a climate emergency, and we are, and if the city council and the city staff are committed to climate action, and I believe they are, then we need to set very clear, actionable goals, and we need to hold ourselves accountable. Doesn't mean we'll hit every single one of them, but we should learn from ones we miss and figure out how to do better next time. But for example, there was supposed to be, pick anything, pick bike lanes, for a variety of reasons, pandemic, what have you. There hasn't been progress on that. That's a pretty simple one. And it's actionable. You can see it, whether it happened or whether it didn't. So that's what's needed. If this is an emergency, and it's an emergency, then everyone needs to understand, what are we trying to do, and measure ourselves against whether we've actually moved the needle.
Mm-hmm. And so tell us about your work as Mayor Gordo's housing advisor. Are you working with the housing task force that he created, and what issues specifically are you looking at?
So when Mayor Gordo ran for election last November, he campaigned on affordable housing, but also balancing the need for affordable housing with Pasadena's tremendous commitment to neighborhood character. And so that is a challenge. And he came up with this idea of he'd like to have a series of special advisors. A lot of people don't understand that the mayor doesn't run the city. It's a part-time job. The city manager is the CEO of the city. And so for someone with a job and a family like Mayor Gordo, it's important that he have people who can assist him besides just the city staff. So he envisions actually a series of special advisors. I was the first on housing because we're completing a new housing element for the city. And so Mayor Gordo convened this housing task force of about 15, 17 community leaders and experts in the field of housing. So yes, I'm working with the city staff, with Chair Bill Bogard, another former mayor who heads up the housing task force. And we meet weekly with Mayor Gordo, former Mayor Bogard, and the city staff. The next step for us is to improve the housing draft of the house, or the draft of the housing element that came out a month ago. I think everyone recognized that a lot more work needs to be done to meet the magnitude of the housing crisis in Pasadena. So we're rolling up our sleeves, and we're going to work on specific measurable goals to protect tenants who make up 62% of our population here in Pasadena, so that they stay in their homes, and make for more affordable housing so people don't have to commute to the jobs in Pasadena. Some of our teachers now are commuting 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half to get to their jobs. Not only does that wear and tear on our educators, and teachers are not the only ones with those kind of grim commutes, but it also means we got to pay them more, right? Because it costs more to drive those long distances. So we need more close-in affordable housing to be a complete community. Pasadena's done more than the surrounding neighbors, Arcadia, San Marino, South Pasadena, La Cañada, but we still have much more to do. And I know that Mayor Gordo is committed to doing that.
Right. And shifting to the Tournament of Roses, you were an early advocate of more diversity in the tournament.
Yes, I was.
You famously wore a shirt in the parade that said "Tournament of Racists." Indeed, it
It's
took
actually
another.
underneath my regular shirt, but
Okay.
it's an urban legend now, and so it's enshrined in history. But yes, it was a silent protest on my part. At that point, the tournament had never had a woman or a person of color in a leadership position in 106 years. To me, that was unacceptable. But within a year, the tournament had integrated its executive committee and added 5 women and people of color to its executive committee, its highest level of leadership, and created a whole new layer of vice chairs and brought in a much more diverse set of leaders. So we made some progress. It was, I'll be candid, that was a tough time. To this day, because I ran into him a couple of years ago, the president of the tournament at the time refuses to shake my hand. I offered it because I am proud of what the tournament has done in the way of progress. But some grudges die hard. The tournament didn't like being called racists, and I understand that. But its policies were objectively exclusionary, and they changed their policies. And I think in America, that's probably a shining example, right? I think we need to get past calling people racists. There are racists, but I think the main problem is not people being racist. The main problem is the structures of racism that perpetuate inequality in our city and in our nation. One of those is, our zoning code. Our zoning code was written in an era when more than 60% of the homes in Pasadena were covered by racially restrictive covenants that said no one who is not purely of the Caucasian race could live in that house. And our zoning is still steeped in that kind of segregationist mindset. And it's time to fix some of those things and make sure that people can live throughout our community, and poverty is not concentrated. In fact, opportunity is available to everybody.
Yeah, and you wrote a great piece recently about the redlining in Pasadena now. People should definitely check that article out. And to be fair, you were right to draw attention to the issue at the tournament. It took another 20 plus years for them to even elect their first Black president and to bring in diverse members of their senior staff. And so obviously you've been very active in local issues for a long time. Are the issues the city is facing today familiar to you? Are you seeing a lot of the same issues cropping up that you dealt with when you were on the city council 30 years ago?
Yeah, a number of them are the same, but America has changed. And in fact, coming back after 20 years of public service in other communities to my hometown, the town that I cherish and always assumed I would return to, I'm actually disappointed that Pasadena hasn't changed more. There are wonderful things that I hope never change about Pasadena. But there are other things. My dad went to high school with Jackie and Mac Robinson, and we are right to be proud of Jackie Robinson. He's an American icon, but he vowed when he left that he never returned, and I think he only came back for one family reunion, despite the fact that his brother and sister still lived in Pasadena. He was that nauseated by the racist atmosphere in Pasadena, and growing up as a high school student and being in segregated elementary schools, and then going to what we now call middle school, in those days junior high, and for the first time being in a diverse environment. Pasadena was judged in a federal court to have segregated schools and ordered to desegregate the schools. This is not Mississippi, Alabama. This is our hometown. So, I think we need to continue to change the things that need changing in Pasadena, and I hope to be part of that. And I look to our current city council, and I also look to the next generation of leaders to carry on the struggle.
Mm-hmm. And you've worked at the highest levels in a number of Southland cities. So along the lines of what you were just talking about, how does Pasadena compare in terms of its leadership, its engaged citizenry, its transparency in government?
Pasadena has some extraordinary assets, but you can't sit on your assets. That's happened a couple times in Pasadena's history. Pasadena in the 20s was an incredibly dynamic place. Just look at our city hall, right? City was about 20,000 population, and they built this extraordinary city hall for a much smaller town because they saw Pasadena's potential, its future, and its opportunity. And then with the Depression and World War II, the older parts of Pasadena declined, and all the new investment went to South Lake and Hastings Ranch and the new suburban developments. And it wasn't until the 60s and 70s that there was really an effort to revive Pasadena and to put it on a progressive track. I think we're probably due for that kind of reboot. Pasadena has a lot of great things going for it, but I'm not sure that it's a leader in the way that it was in generations past. And I think to those who much is given, much is asked. And I think we should be a leader, not just for other Southern California cities, but this is the first time in human history that a majority of the world's people live in cities. And if in a city with as much going for it as Pasadena can't set an example on climate change, on social justice, on racial equity, what hope is there for Kinshasa or Jakarta or Sao Paulo? These cities face, or for that matter, Kabul. These cities face extraordinary challenges with much less in the way of resources. We have tremendous resources, so we should be setting a better example.
Great. Well, Mr. Cole, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show and providing us your insights on these important topics. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this. The health and well-being of local media is crucial. We've become very national and addicted to Twitter and Facebook and cable news, and local news actually has more impact on people's lives. So thank you, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go, here is this month in Pasadena history. It was in August 1958 when 26-year-old Joan Williams was chosen by first her coworkers at City Hall and then a panel of tournament officials and newspaper editors to be Miss Crown City 1958, a Rose Queen-esque honor at the time. She was supposed to ride on the city's float in the January 1st, 1959 Rose Parade. However, when city officials discovered Williams, who had a light complexion, was actually African-American, they canceled the float, denied her other benefits, such as appearances at ribbon cuttings for department store openings. The mayor, Seth Miller, refused to take a photo with her, and her coworkers at City Hall ostracized her. Nearly 60 years later, in 2013, Williams decided to tell her story to me for a cover article in the Pasadena Weekly. That resulted in then Mayor Bill Bogard issuing an official apology and the Tournament of Roses offering for her to ride in the lead float in the January 1st, 2015 Rose Parade, which she did nearly 6 decades after being discriminated against. Sadly, Joan passed away in 2019, but not before she made an indelible impact on this community. You can read more about her poignant yet hopeful story on my website, JustinDouglasChapman.com. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of News Wrap Local. I'm Justin Chapman, signing off. Tune in every third Friday of the month at 5 p.m. You can watch this show on Channel 32 on Charter Spectrum, Channel 99 on AT&T Uverse, YouTube, Facebook, and the Pasadena Media streaming app on Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, and Roku. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and JustinDouglasChapman.com. Sign up for my monthly email newsletter to get updates on my work by visiting justinchapman.substack.com/subscribe. See you again next month.